the economy as strong and as prosperous as possible. And so I think we ought to be focused on how much more the government needs to do to get there, rather than what happens if they don't do it.
Okay, and what further reforms would be needed beyond 2029 so that the government would go back into the black?
So there are more things to do in the areas that are already in the fiscal plan, above and beyond what's required. So in the area of ease of doing business, as an example, the reform right now assumes getting Puerto Rico, part way towards being close to the mainland in terms of indicators. Puerto Rico could do more than that. It could become much more competitive and create even better environment for the ease of doing business. There are also things that are not in the fiscal plan, some that the previous legislature rejected. For example, in private sector labor law, making Puerto Rico more of an at-will employment environment, like 49 of 50 states on the mainland, would be something that would be additive, incremental to the fiscal plan in terms of structural reforms to grow the economy. The other thing that is not in the fiscal plan that we've talked about often, and I don't know, John Nixon may want to comment, is doing a serious fundamental tax reform would make Puerto Rico more competitive. So today we have a system of high marginal rates and massive incentives and massive credits and complicated systems and individual contracts. A system that was more transparent and broader based and that had lower tax rates would be something that would be transformative. I know that today is not the day that that's going to happen. That's not one of the requirements of the fiscal plan, but it's certainly something that would improve the economic growth rates in the island beyond what's in the fiscal plan.
So you wouldn't support measures such as the $15 minimum wage for Puerto Rico?
I didn't say anything about that.
Well, because that would be, in terms of labor reform of, making it more flexible. Many people have said that the minimum wage is an obstacle to that.
When I spoke about flexibility, I meant specifically with regard to, I think it's Law 80, Edward? Is it the old Law 80?
Yeah. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, the old Law 80. And I was specifically speaking to the at-will employment issue. In Puerto Rico, law requires very substantial severance pay. And that substantial severance pay, although I understand the history and the culture of having provided it, is something that's not required in 49 out of 50 states. Montana is the only exception. That severance pay is a disincentive to employers to bring employees onto the payroll in a formal way. It often gives incentive to keep employees in the informal sector where they're not collecting income taxes and you're not getting the benefit of Social Security. It often causes employers not to hire an additional person. It is a very hard incremental cost, and it's something that we discussed previously, but it was not about the minimum wage that I was speaking.
Okay, thank you.
Next one, Sado Santana Metro.
I'm sorry, Edward. Justin has his hand up.
Justin may have wanted.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add to what Natalie said, which I agree with what she said, that ending bankruptcy is going to bring investment and economic growth. And I think that we also need to remember there's huge cost and quantifiable cost to Puerto Rico remaining in bankruptcy. Ending bankruptcy, hopefully we can do it by the end of the year, is going to bring more investment. It's going to create more incentive for businesses to come to Puerto Rico because we're going to be eliminating a lot of uncertainty. So that's really important too. That's an intangible that is going to have real effect.
Okay, Sado Santana, Metro newspaper.
Hi to all. First, I just have a question regarding the third-party fiduciary for the Department of Education. One of the effects before finalizing the contract with the third-party fiduciary was the millions of dollars that were frozen for the Department of Education. With the deal now finalized, when can we expect that those funds will be freed? I have more questions.
I don't know an exact date. I don't know whether they've already been freed or whether, because the contract's been entered into, or whether it's any day now. I think, what you can assume is that the monies are going to flow because this has been something that was held up for, months and months, and it is done. Today it is done. And so I would expect, I don't know what date, but federal funds will be available, including, remember, some of the CARES Act money that was held up for education. So this is an incredibly important day to free up all those funds. But I don't know a date. That would be a question for the U.S. Department of Education, not for me.
Okay. And regarding the PSA, concerning the CBI, is the board going to update its projections in the new fiscal plan? And if so, is it going to make a projection of how much can the bondholders receive on average each year from the CBI? Have you guys made that projection? Or are you going to make it?
So first of all, just to be clear, the CBI trigger is actually the May 2020 certified fiscal plan. So to be clear, the baseline from which you measure is not the new fiscal plan to come, but the May 2020 certified fiscal plan that is in place right now. In terms of estimating, the board doesn't have any idea what the next 22 years of SUT outperformance could be. The actual performance that we believe is, in our judgment, the most accurate projection will be in the new fiscal plan. But I think there's no way for me to make a judgment as to the outperformance, because that is based on things that we don't know, right? It's based on, the intangible benefit that Mr. Peterson discussed of getting out of bankruptcy. I don't know what that intangible benefit is, but some benefit will cause boats to rise in the economy. Or some other federal stimulus that occurs because of an unknown piece of legislation in the future in Congress, which might provide someone benefits. Or the SSI decision, which remains stuck at the Supreme Court. That's not in our calculations. If that happens in a positive way, that money will go to Puerto Rican individuals who qualify for disability, and that will, again, raise in an uncalculable fashion, create outperformance that will give the CBI value. What's important to note is that there is an annual cap on the CBI, so whatever that outperformance is, they cannot earn more than, I think it's $400 million per year and $3.6 billion over the lifetime of the CBI. So if outperformance is, massive beyond those numbers, that is not something that's included in the CBI. If it's less, or if performance is less than the May 2020 fiscal plan, then there's no payment.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up regarding my colleague's question before.
We need to move on, Salo, so please, this is the last one.
Yeah, just to clarify, because I have bad signal over here. How does the board stand regarding the minimum wage? If it goes up $15 an hour here in Puerto Rico, what is the board's view on that? I'm not sure you answered before. Like I said, I have poor signal just before. Can you answer that?
I didn't answer it because the board has not discussed it. You can look to the previous board's position on that with regard to something that Governor Roseo implemented for federal contracts alone. And that logic represents, I'm sure, the views of some board members. But as you know, we have a new board and we have not had that discussion yet.
Okay. John Marino, New York.
Yeah, hi. I just had some basic questions about the changes in the treatment of pensions that you mentioned today at the meeting. What prompted those? They're new from the PSA, I believe, and if there's room for additional changes as you negotiate with unions. The governor seemed to think that one of the agreements you made with one of the unions was positive, and I don't know, it seemed to think that if you could replicate that with other employee unions, you could maybe increase support.
So thank you for that. The pension treatment that I described today, moving the threshold from 1,200 to 1,500, is not part of the PSA, just to be clear. The PSA is solely with GO-PBA bondholders, and there's nothing in there about pensions. That change in threshold was voted on by the board last October, and it will be part of the plan of adjustment filed on March 8th. So that is the change, and it reduces the number of retirees that are actually going to experience a reduction in their benefits. In particular, moving the threshold to 1,500 was something that, first of all, governments and legislators have been asking for. You hear the news here. You know this is the singular most important thing to many of the elected officials on this island. But the number was chosen for some of the reasons that I described to you today, which is that we took into consideration that police and teachers who had average pensions under $1,500, but above $1,200, who do not benefit from Social Security because Puerto Rico did not provide Social Security to those retired individuals. For police and teachers did not receive Social Security. Those will not, with this change in threshold, have the effective cut. And again, all other public employees other than teachers and cops do have Social Security. And remember, this cut is only on your public pension. So they were getting, their public pension reduced, but they were still getting Social Security. These folks were not getting Social Security. And so this was in an attempt to take care of the police and the teachers who fell in that zone and without Social Security were being harmed kind of overall in a way that was unbalanced.
And just as a quick follow-up, I was reading through the PSA, and it doesn't seem that any legislation from the local legislature is required to implement a pension cut. Is that true? Is that your reading?
I can't answer that. I think a lot, on the role of the legislature generally to cut off that set of questions, we have to wait and see what the court confirms and what the court confirmation order looks like. So I don't know exactly what legislature will be required for what element. And, we can assume
well,
some won't.
The CBI and the jail bonds legislation, I mean, it seems to be pretty explicitly stated in the agreement.
That's the assumption for today. That is correct.
Okay.
But to get to your other question on unions, we've been in discussion with a variety of other unions. We, continue to be open-minded and seek the support of the public service, of the public employees, simply because they've been the ones that have suffered from wage freeze that predated Promesa, and all of these changes in retirement benefits. The last thing I want to say on pensions, just to be clear, is police now do, on a going forward, active police do get Social Security, the government, and we changed that last year, and we are working towards doing exactly the same for teachers on a going forward basis.
Okay.
Thank you.
Eva Llorens, Step Wire. Eva? She might left the room.
Got a mute now.
Yes, so sorry. I was trying to unmute.
Okay.
Yeah, I have like one clarification and two questions, and I'll be brief. First, the $7 billion that will be given to in the PSA that will be given to the creditors in cash, does that come from that $8 billion reserve that the government has that you all created?
We never created an $8 billion reserve. The $7 billion comes from the cash in Commonwealth bank accounts.
Okay.
As you recall, all cash that we've measured as of June 30th, 2020, including PREPA, PRASA, and other public entities that are not part of the Commonwealth technically for this restructuring, the total was over $20 billion. And so this is about $7 billion of cash from the Commonwealth portion of that cash.
Okay, so do you know how much money will be left in the bank accounts if you put up that $7 billion in cash to the creditors?
Again, some 2022 minus 7.
Okay.
But then monies have been used this year. So, I mean, that's a number as of June 30th. I don't know what monies, sometimes when you see us do reprogrammings, and we say you can use funds that were held last year, so sometimes that uses some of the cash. So, I mean, it's a moving target, right? And but generally you could take last June 30th and subtract 7.
Okay. Also, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit, if you can, about what will happen with the PREPA deal, because what's been going on with that, and also if you could give me an opinion as to, since you all talk about the conflict of interest ethics today. What will be your opinion or your stance on legislation in Congress that was filed by Nydia Velázquez that calls for FOMB contractors to submit reports on any possible conflict of interest they may have And that's it. If you could give me, those are the two other questions.
So on the PREPA RSA, unfortunately, Eva, I have no news for you other than to say that we continue to work hard on trying to find a solution and work with creditors and the government to enable us to successfully bring PREPA out of bankruptcy. But I have no other public news on that.
But are you still hopeful that you will have a deal this year, or does it look more long-term?
I'm still hopeful that we get out of PREPA bankruptcy this year, yes.
Okay, and what about the Velasquez?
On the question of conflict on the legislation proposed by Congresswoman Velasquez, I mean, in the past, it's the same legislation as I understand. We've been very supportive of Congresswoman Velasquez's legislative proposal. Just for everyone's background, it extends the disclosure requirements of the federal bankruptcy procedure to professionals employed by the board, the official committees, meaning the retirement committee, and others, the unsecured creditors committee, or debtors, to avoid conflicts of interest. And its goal is transparency and disclosure. We support transparency and disclosure fully as part of what we tried to bring to you today in terms of our own work inside of our own entity. The only thing that we have noted before, and I'll note it today, is that Congresswoman Velasquez's legislation has to be practically implemented. And in looking at the practical implementation, it's going to require disclosures of each professional's connections with all creditors. Just to make, what does all creditors mean? Well, in the Title III cases, there are 165,000 creditors that have filed proofs of claim. That means that every advisor is going to have, if you take it literally, which is the way it's written, every advisor is going to have to comment on their need or their relationship with each of the 165,000 creditors on claim. That is practically, again, nothing against it in principle, practically going to be a enormous amount of compliance. And I think the hardest part of that compliance will fall on the shoulders of local firms here in Puerto Rico that we work with. But again, the board is supportive of transparency and disclosure. The board supports the Congresswoman's efforts. In terms of our own processes, we've already applied much of those standards and have gone through that. You can see on our website with our advisors and the reporting that we require from them on conflicts.
I have one more question. I forgot.
Eva, we need to move on, please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Why did you wait? There are some people who are asking why did the board waited until until now to hire an outside help to be able to move the audited financial statements forward when that has something.
We didn't wait. He's been working with us for some time. We just presented some of the work to you today, but it was not recent. We've been working on it for quite some time. If you recall, we held a public hearing on this previously on the same issue, and we provided recommendations then. The only thing that's new today is the governor's willingness to make this a priority. The governor's willingness to act and change what has been delayed for years. Our efforts have been continuous from the day the board was established.
Oh, thank you.
Next question, Johnny Gonzalez and Nuevo Dia. Johnny?
I'm getting sent it through email. There's a lot of noise where I am. I'm sorry.
Next question. Someone else? I have a question from got texted. If Puerto Rico comes out of the bankruptcy at the end of the year, when the board leaves Puerto Rico?
There are two primary requirements in the law for the board to end its service. One is 4 years of balanced budgets, and the second is returned market access at reasonable interest rates. So it's easy to foresee that 4 balanced budgets could be the years fiscal year 22, 23, 24, 25. What's not as easily predictable is returned market access at reasonable interest rates. One of the elements of returned access is being timely with your CAFRs. So why do we continue to push on getting the financial audits in place? Because you cannot have returned market access at reasonable rates unless you're providing timely audited financial statements. So That one is difficult for me to define, but it is absolutely a priority of this board and a priority now of the governor to get that done. That's one element. There are many elements. I would argue that economic growth is probably another one of those elements that gives you market access at reasonable interest rates, which is what the law says. So the second one is a little bit harder to determine, but let's just try and say we'll get everything done as quickly as possible with the support of the government and the legislature and everyone's common desire to see the board complete its mandate and return all responsibility back to the elected officials of Puerto Rico.
I wanted to ask a question concerning that. When you talk about leaving bankruptcy by the end of the year with the POA, what happens to the RSA and these other deals? So you can do that just with the POA? You're referring just to the Commonwealth, or?
I'm only referring to the Commonwealth. For every one of the entities, our work continues until each of those entities has 4 years of balanced budget. So we have to complete the debt restructuring at PREPA, which is, I think, what you're referring to when you say RSA, and then, returned market access.
Joanny sent her a question. It was my understanding PREPA was rejecting a determined number of renewable PPOAs in court. Are those the same 16 projects the board rejected?
No, I need to check, but I believe that those were, those are not, those are other contracts that were non-operational.
And she has a follow-up question. Now that the board is rejecting these PPOAs, what legal or economic consequences PREPA could face?
I don't know of any. Again, these contracts all had to be, these are contracts that existed pre-petition, pre the filing of Title III. So in the bankruptcy court, PREPA and we needed to make a decision whether to accept or reject each of these, any of these pre-petition contracts. A series of them have already been put in the courtroom for rejection under the bankruptcy, and some are being accepted today. The board agreed, and we move forward with 150 megawatts of renewable, and others will be rejected. So this is part of the bankruptcy process. I don't know that there's any incremental cost other than getting done with this so we can complete the Title III case in PREPA.
Okay, looks like we have no additional questions. She has another one. Regarding the PSA, did I hear correctly that you received 70% support?
Yes, that was announced to the market, I believe, either yesterday morning or the morning before. Edward, when we posted it on
yesterday morning, yeah.
Yesterday morning. We are over 70%, yes. Including the monolines, which are conditionally accepted.
I have one additional question concerning the new PSA. The 11.7 billion support of the 8.18 billion, what does that mean?
That's that's the holders of the $11.7 billion worth of creditors holding $11.7 billion of the 19 have agreed with the PSA. They've raised their hand and they say, we sign on, we agree with the terms, we will exchange our debt under this agreement.
So what happens with the rest?
To be honest with you, more and more seem to be joining. So they will have an opportunity to continue to join. And we'll see, by the time we get to confirmation, how high that number is. But at some point, it's up to the judge. And if the majority agree, then the exchange will, not the majority, but if the rules of bankruptcy in the bankruptcy are met, and they're more complicated than what I'm describing, there's a numbers and then there's a percentage. But if the rules are met, then all of it will be exchanged, even those that don't agree.
So the goal is 35 billion, right? Reaching 35.
So no, let's just be clear. In terms of the debt, it's this 19. The 35 billion, the other claims against the Commonwealth are not debt claims. They're clawback claims, and they are unsecured creditor claims. This is the debt that makes up the biggest piece of the 35, but there's no other bonded debt in the 35. The rest of it is clawback claims from ERS, from monolines, and then it is also the unsecured creditors.
So that's going to be part of the POA on March 8th. Right?
Jose, we need to move on. We have two last questions. I would like to know the amount of the contract awarded to Hill to assist in producing CAFRs.
Actually, his contract is primarily about ERP implementation, not CAFRs. It's just that those things are very intertwined. His contract is online on our website. I don't have it in front of me, but I urge you to go to the website, and it is posted there in its entirety. All of our contracts with all of our advisors are posted online for full transparency.
And one last question. Espacios Abierto claimed the board fell short of its objectives in renegotiating the Commonwealth's debt. Any comments?
No, I feel we have reached our objectives in negotiating the debt. We've reached what we believe is the most fair, the most sustainable, structurally sustainable for the government of Puerto Rico agreement that was possible.
Thank you very much. Gracias.
Gracias.